a spirit living on earth.
Now we're going to get Dr. Marco to come back up again and give us a talk. He is currently a member of the Toronto Spiritist Society, and he gives talks and coordinates study sessions. Professionally, he is a doctor of dental surgery, has a PhD, and is currently doing his residency in oral pathology at the University of Toronto, Canada. Please join and welcome Dr. Marco to the podium to help us understand the Spiritist-Medical view on cancer.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's just a pleasure to be here in this event. And I don't know if you notice, I'm going to hold the microphone just because I may move around a little bit. It's just an honor to be here and to see all these beautiful faces and honoring. I didn't have a chance to stay very long with Celine, but it's just a pleasure for me to be here in this beautiful event. Thank you, Vanessa, for the opportunity. And this is a very, I wouldn't say difficult, but a tricky topic to talk about in a day like today. Just because, we have a lot of difficulties understanding the first point, what cancer is. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to put cancer in another mood, another theme, another way of at least looking at it, and I hope you guys are going to be able to follow that along. That's pretty much what I deal with every day. So I, on average, I would say I give the bad news for about 25 people a week, which is not very fun, but at the same time, we know we can offer help at the same time, especially if you understand both the spiritual and the medical aspect of it. And today, I'm going to tell you the story of my little friend, Carcinus, the crab. And it's interesting because we call this disease the crab. Carcinus comes from the Greek word, and it was then later translated into Latin and carcinos, and then changed into carcinoma, and then changed into cancer. And then I will tell you through the history of this little friend here how much we don't know about the disease and the little bit we know, and how our little friend Carcinos here have a very interesting history in time. So let you know, as the beginning, I think I have a pointer here. Yeah, good. So to let you know, there are over 850 species of crabs. That's kind of shocking, I know. Many people think that they move only sideways, and that's not true, actually. There are lots of species that move forward and backwards. They can even spin around, which is kind of fun. And as weird as it sounds, actually, they have a very intricate system of mating. They stand beside each other, the male and the female, for a long time, and they find a little nest where they're gonna have their little kids, and they're very family-oriented, as probably we don't know. But the interesting thing about the crab is that the crab has been in history. There's a huge, every major step in history, there's somehow a crab involved. And what you want to know here is that this is, for those of you who know, or you don't know, this is the second task of Heracles, right? And this is Heracles. He is actually fighting off the Hydra. The Hydra, in the mythology, was the serpent with multiple heads. And the funny thing is that for him to kill the serpent, if he tried to chop down one head of the Hydra would grow two heads in its place. So it's a daunting task. So what he did, he called up a friend of Iolaus, a big friend, his cousin, by the way, and Hercules, for those one who might recognize him by Hercules instead of Heracles. Actually, none of those but were the real name, probably. But, yes, that's interesting. When he was trying, so Iolaus, what Iolaus was doing, he was actually burning the heads while Heracles were chopping the heads. So in that way, the Hydra didn't have a chance to grow two heads. And that's how he figured out a way to go through this amazing task. But when Juno, or Hera, which was the one that proposed the task for Heracles, figured out that Hercules might be winning the game, she sent our little friend Crab. So the little crab was supposed to fight off this gigantic fighter and his friend. So what he did, he just clicked on his finger, on the little toe, actually, and hold on to it as hard as he could. So the crab is remembered for this to be a very courageous creature, and to hold on even in the worst conditions possible, you can imagine. Of course, he lost the fight, and Heracles stepped on it. But because he was so loyal to Hera, Hera sent him to the sky, and that's why we have the crab constellation. That's a little bit of history and funny facts. And there you go. Then afterwards, we even have the Crab Nebula, which is, someone looked at this nebula and said, you know, this looks like a little crab. I'm not so sure about that. But you see how the crab has been in history. And of course, not only that, a very famous man called Hippocrates, he, for about 400 years before Christ, started to describe some ulcers in the body, which had some form of array of pattern of growing that was like a finger-like projection. So he said, you know, maybe we should call this carcinose, as something that we would relate to the shape of a crab. But he was not the first. About 3,000 years before Christ, Egypt physicians were describing 8 little ulcers on patients in the breast. And what they did that time, see how we, now I'm going to tell you the story and you think about what we do now. So what they did 3,000 years before Christ, they would take this heated piece of rock and would dig it on the ulcer. So they would burn out the ulcer in order for the ulcer to go away. And that way they were able to cure some of them, but not other like section of this patient cohort did not succeed. And they of course, they didn't use the word cancer at that time, but it's very well described. And one of the papyrus that was found, it's called Edwin Smith papyrus. Not only that, a lot of people after the Babylonians even had the crab in many aspects of the culture. And there you go. We have this very same thing coming up multiple times. Another very, very important character in the history of medicine, Aulus Cornelius Celsus. He was an encyclopedist. He wrote a whole section of books, like about 8 or 9 books on medicine. And one of the things he described, he again used the word carcinose or cancer or carcinoma to describe some of the lesions. And throughout history, we had some very interesting explanations for this. And one that I found very amusing, and you'll see some of us still use certain things in our houses because of this. It was thought at some point that if a person with a disease, a congenital disease, would stare at you while you're pregnant, your baby would be born with that same condition. So they would call that the evil eye. And cultures over time, what they did, they would display certain things that would protect them from the evil eye. As an example, you'll see in Egypt, they would have an eye on the palm of their hands, and you have other cultures from the Nordic seas, they would have like a target-like pattern, which looks like an eye, that would hold on doors, so people that come in your house don't have the evil eye. And you'll see that in many, many different places, and that's some of us, that's why we have the fist. That's also a protection for the evil eye, which it started pretty much the same way over time. But some people thought that this was so intriguing for them. They didn't know how to explain it. So what they did, they thought, maybe someone stares at me and he has a disease. And then all of a sudden, that comes to me, and actually my kid has that. But why were they thinking that? Because very, very often this happens in babies. So how can you explain? Remember at that time people thought that diseases were punishing by God. So God was punishing them. So how could God punish a little kid with that disease that the parents had? So even that time, thousands of years before Christ, people would have to think about this. And that's the first idea of congenital diseases and how cancer can be sometimes inherited by a specific chromosome pattern, right? There are other theories, more recent, the humoral therapy, which some fluids in your body would move away into certain parts of your body and start generating diseases that could not be cured by using the typical things that you used to do at the time. Interesting about cancer is that we do not have a specific cause, and that bothers us very much. Because our scientific mind in medicine tends to think that, well, I have a problem, I necessarily need a very specific, well-defined physical situation that explains my physical condition. And that may not be true in every single point, and we don't know. We're very far away from knowing all those things. And then comes more recently, the idea of a chronic irritation to certain areas that would trigger on cancers and then trauma, and there you go. The American Cancer Society has a whole history book on cancer, which it's actually very interesting to know what people, because remember, cancer is not new. Some people think that, well, cancer is on the rise. Yes, it is. But remember, we started to recognizing cancer as an entity about 50 years ago. So which means that, of course, it's on the rise, because we're still figuring out what it is. And it's going to be on the rise. It's going to be on the rise. And we can move on to this little guy. There's very interesting guys, very young at the time, very elementary, my dear Watson, if you guys remember the very famous Sherlock Holmes sentence. But Watson and Crick, they were the first to figure out what exactly is a DNA, how it shapes down. Because no one, before 1953, it was impossible for us to understand cancer. And the reason why is because we didn't understand that our genetic code was formed into this very specific pattern and would move forward into cells. And that's why the diseases started to happen. So this was a major, major step. They were both working in Cambridge. And it's interesting because people like to, in science, we like to call Chance a very smart person. Chance is very smart in science. So Chance comes around and does two things. They're very intelligent and bring two intelligent people together at the right time, the right place, and they do the exact perfect thing to figure out something that we took about 5,000 years in history to figure out. So it's interesting how people call that intelligent chance. I like calling it very, very intelligent chance. So by the way, chance does not exist. But so these two guys, they actually, it's funny, the history tells that they actually bumped on each other. They were not in the same lab. One was a very extremely smart biochemist, and the other one was a biologist. So they kind of stood at each other and said, you know, let's do something very difficult. Oh yeah, let's do something very difficult. We all want to know what a DNA is, right? So you do the biochemistry, I do the biology, and we'll do it. All of a sudden, 1 year later, they started in 52. In 53, they already had the answer to this, which is very interesting. So this is now what we know now more recently about this disease. This is a cell, by the way, and this is a dividing cell. So what cancer is, in a very, very basic concept, when a cell divides, so our body, we have billions of them in our bodies, each one have very specific roles, very specific places, and they have this nice track of things they will do when they've formed, they grow, and then they die. So they know that because that's encoded in their DNA, the genetic code, which is right in the middle, in the nucleus of this cell. But sometimes, occasionally, some of the cells, they go a little bit off track. And they may say, I do not want to die. And they want to linger on forever in your body. That's not possible. So 100 different mechanisms that actually go in here and tell you know what, you can't do this. And then things go back to normal. But occasionally, at some point, one of these mechanisms is going to fail, and this little cell went off track, will continue duplicating over and over time and getting out of control and growing and go different places where they're not supposed to. They're very stubborn. Guess what? We're actually very similar to that too. We tend to do a lot of things that we're actually not supposed to. There's a lot of mechanism that regulates us. We know they're all, some of my friends I wrote are going to talk about Christ and what he wrote and how does that correlate to that. We know the script. We know the script. We don't do it still. So that's what they do. So can you say that they're actually mimicking some of our own behaviors? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Some people like to say that. But anyway, this is a breast cancer cell. Now, if you ask me, what is the difference between this cell and the other cell side by side? Very little differences. So that's why it's so difficult. Because what is the source? When you have an infection, what do? You go there, kill the bug. So you kill the bug, you're out of it. When it's part of you, what do? Yeah. So that blank is exactly what science is trying to understand. But the problem with science, too, is that science looks at this flower as a sequence array of cells that have a very nice, intricate pattern that stay side by side. They know each other because they were brought up by the same plant, and they're here. They're matter. That's what I see. That's science. Now, if I look at someone, or if I look here, I see a very organized, living energy that's shown to me, to my little human eyes, as a flower. But beyond that, there are so many layers of existence that our eyes cannot really understand, and that's what we study in Spiritism. When I look at someone, I look at the physical representation of a matter body. Is there more to that? Of course it is, and that's where sometimes science gets a little bit to one side of the story. It cannot answer it all. But science do answer a lot of things. Here's a very representative image. Of course, I'm not going to bring a lot of fancy numbers, equations. No, just I promise that's the last one. But this is interesting for you to understand one thing. This is the record history of cigarette consumption, the black line. So in history, we started to measuring that in 1900, and it went up to approximately about 4,000 cigarettes per capita year. That's what we consume every year. And the blue line is actually the recorded history of lung cancer. I'm pretty sure you guys are not real scientists, but you can look at this and kind of understand that there is a pattern here. So when we started to smoke, all of a sudden, we started to have an exactly mirror image of lung cancer incidence, which tells you that, maybe they're connected, and they are, actually. So science was able to tell you this. Unfortunately, remember the little story of stubborn cell? Yeah, stubborn me is still, look at this, and do not change. But this is part of our free will. It's up to us. We have to decide. But anyway, it's just to show you that science does answer a lot of things. Of course, there's a lot of other things to be answered. And we can see that through here. Oh, this is an interesting movie. This is part of actually my research, because I do a lot of research in cancer. So these are breast cancer cells. You see they're moving around. You see they're happy. Unfortunately, they're in the wrong place, the wrong time, and they're doing the wrong thing. And that's the problem with them, This is one of the papers we published not long ago, trying to understand how the cells move through the body. Because one of the problems with cancer is not because they're just wildly reproducing and replicating, it's because they do things they're not supposed to, like going places where they're not welcome. And that's what we call metastasis. And that's the number one difficulty with the treatments of cancer. All right. So do you know what this little monster? This is something very common. And what's interesting here is that this little creature helped us understand almost 90% of what you know about genetics. And this little guy is a fruit fly. This is a fruit fly on a scanning electron microscope, SCEM. And they don't look very pretty, but they helped us so much. And the reason why, because these little guys, they're fruit flies. They're like these little guys that fly around in bananas in our houses. They're exactly the same. But what we can do is that we can go into these little guys and just switch one thing on and off very easily. And all of a sudden, one of those guys is going to be born without a wing. And then, we switch one thing, and there's one wing. So it's like a wingless gene. And we call it WG gene, WGL gene. And that's how the names of the genes started, by the way, which is very interesting. So in science, too, sometimes we're not that creative. We just kind of use very common terms, but we try to make it complicated. So, it kind of makes us feel like we're really doing an amazing thing. But throughout history, again, by the same time, I would say, like 100 years before people actually realized how DNA looked like, a fellow named Allan Kardec started to study the other part of this story, which is the spiritual world, existence. This is not new this is known to us since recorded history. Since the earliest point in history, all cultures had one thing in common. One thing in common. And that thing is that they knew there was something else. They can't explain it. Some people would call that the sun was something magical, and they would refer to something that's above you. So that's how we started. We started to relate things like in nature, something that we thought it was very impossible for us to explain, like the sun at that time. And then we tried to bring it down, so then were trees, and then were rivers, and then were things that looked like us. So that's how the idea of a higher being that looked like us, and then they actually were part of us, like another person, but that was like a goddess at that time. And we see that a lot, quite a lot, after the Greek mythology when we go into the Roman history. And then we started to understand that, well, there's a few things above us, but there are other things that we can't see. And Allan Kardec did this amazing I wouldn't say methodology, it was basically like a scientific approach, because he was a professor. So he did a scientific approach on understanding how this thing would be linked together. So here we have our physical body, our perispiritual body, and we as a spirit. So these three things are interconnected all the time. What is the problem is that when I go into my lab and I see those little funny cells running around, I only see this. So what am I gonna, if I want to study that, the answers I'm gonna bring are related to matter. And what's interesting, because Allan Kardec explained in the spirits that communicated through this multiple books and the Spiritist magazine at that time, would actually try to bring to us the concept that some of these problems are not arising here. They are arising from here, or from previous existence, or from my own decisions of what I wanted to do, what I've done before. It's a very, very complex array of things that were happening. But you see, this is 100 years before DNA was even brought into light of science. But no one really picked on that idea, very few. So, what we understand today, if we try to link things together, and I'll follow along and I'll try to explain this to you. So here we are. We are here. We are this three-parted thing. We are body, physical body, spiritual body, and spirit. And all things that happen in our life, everything that we do could be a trigger. For example, smoking, alcohol, your lifestyle, nutrition, anything that would inflict on the pathways of your body, in your mind, or in your soul. When you put everything that would shift on that pathway into a negative or a dysfunctional way, then you're gonna have the reaction of your actions. And the reaction of your actions are going to be imprinted in your perispiritual body. So we carry that. We don't see that at a time. So some people tell me, you know what? Like, I drink like a bottle of liquor a day. I never had liver cancer. So you're wrong. And I tell them, you know what? Think about this for a minute. I know what you do, and that's fine. That's your free will. But every time you go into a pathway, every decision you make is going to generate a very balanced reaction, or something is going to happen after you make a decision. If you make a very good decision of helping someone, I can almost certainly guarantee you that you're going to receive back a very, very positive response from that. If you decide to do certain things, like for example, in drinking liquor or doing anything that will change the normal pathway of your body, of course you're going to have a response. Can it be now? I can't tell you. I can't. Can it be in the future? Probably. What's going to happen? I don't know. Something's going to happen. I can guarantee you. Because the laws are just. What that means is that I'm not punished. That does not exist. I am the player. I decide what's going to happen. My decisions are going to tell that. Sometimes I will decide to do certain things, and I'll have to go through the consequences of every decision. So, but the interesting thing is that this is physical, right? So if I do smoke, I do change the way my cells reproduce, and that automatically triggers me to probably having cancer. But that could also linger on and leave this energy, which is a very imbalanced energy on your paraspiritual body, and that has to be somehow cleared up. And the clearing system of that energy goes through your body again. So what happens is and again, it goes to stress, selfishness, pride, hate, and like Joana de Angelis says, the moral cancer. What is the moral cancer? Because cancer, again, is not a physical disease only. It's a combination of physical, a physical, psychological process, spiritual process that you go through. It's not as easy as I tell you, well, you do this, this is going to happen to you. Not necessarily. There's a lot of different things you can do, right? So, anger is one of the moral cancers. If you're angry all the time, you're being the medium of angry. Anger. So, if I go into a room and I make everyone around me feel angry, I'm disseminating, so I'm the medium of that. And that's going to generate consequences in my perispiritual body. And that's going to linger on, and I'll have to clear that up somehow. And maybe in the future what's happened is that I'll be back with DNA mutations on specific parts of my body that will increase my risk of having a cancer. And that's how we now understand the congenital aspect of inherited aspect of cancer, for example. And that's why we see very young kids with myelomas, for example. If you look on that only existence alone, you cannot explain it. So we have to go back a few steps and remember the story of the stubborn guy that was drinking alcohol every day for a long time? Well, you don't know. Did that generate a specific change in the spiritual body that would translate it into his body as a DNA mutation that increased his chances of having a myeloma? Probably. And that's why cancer is so complicated, right? And that's this case. Sometimes we discriminate, and this little green energy clouds, actually, these were results of some stimuli that I've created on myself. Could be through a list of things. Moral cancers, my lifestyle, my nutrition, my stress, my ignorance, and multiple other things. That little stimuli generates this energy that lingers on. And what's interesting, again, when I discarnate, that continues because I don't change. I'm still myself. I just got rid of this very nice system of a physical body existence that allows me to interact with this world. But then when I come back, well, again, since I did not change, I'm still the same person, I'm going to carry on that. And that's where we see this congenital mutations, the increased risk of cancer, and all that could potentially generate cancer. This is not a sentence. Can I go around and change this? Oh, yes, we can do that any time. Actually, let's do it now. That's what we're here for, right? So, treatments, and that's such a tricky topic because standard science will tell you that, well, your only chance are surgery number 1, which is very valid. Chemotherapy, which in cases is extremely good. Other cases, not. And there are all numbers to tell you. I don't want to give you numbers, but there are many numbers to tell you when it's good and when it's not good. Radiation therapy sometimes is actually curative for the body. But did that cure me? That's the question. It got rid of my cancer cells for sure. But changing the cure, the understanding of cure, is way more complex than just getting rid of your cells. They're going crazy. Unfortunately, for our society today, what we want is a magic pill. And the magic pill is never going to appear. Why is that? Why you're so, sad saying that? Because magic pill means that I'll get something that automatically transforms me into another person. Because cancer, like I said, is not only your physical body. And that's never going to change unless you work for it. So there are treatments that will remove these cancer cells from your body, yes. But the real cure goes way beyond that. It comes from your change in perspective, your change as a spirit. Now, these changes are related to your physical body. Now, how about the changes in cure of your perispiritual body and your spirit? I know Haroldo is looking at me and he's like, yeah, I'm going to talk about this. And I'm not going to step into that. But, look at the gospel. Okay, let's go. The righteous life. Love your neighbor. Love yourself. Charity. There's so many things we can come up with in our list of things that can cure us as a spiritual being. That will, of course, generate changes in your body. But even if we do everything listed here, sometimes we still have the disease. And that's fair, because very often we decided to go through that route in order for us to learn and transform ourselves into a better person. So remember this. And remember this carefully. Having a disease does not, or getting rid of the disease, does not correlate necessarily with curing yourself. Does not correlate. What's going to tell you if you're curing yourself is how you deal with it, who you are as a person. Can I die of cancer and actually be a much, much better person? Oh yeah, of course. And that's what happens almost every day. Simply ask people who go through this. And if you're able to, we have multiple stories of spirits that tell us what happened when they actually went through this. And ask them. You'll see what they tell you. Some of them will be so happy that we're able to go through this and learn so much from it and be a better person afterwards. And clear themselves of that same energy that could probably be lingering around for multiple reincarnations so far. And then we go back to our little friend, Karkinos. And the question in Greek mythology, they question themselves, Karkinos, why are you so tenacious? Because remember, he was holding on to Heracles while Heracles was stepping on him. And that's a question for us. How are we going to deal with this situation? I told you, I promised not to bring numbers, but I have to give you one. Approximately 25% of us are going to have cancer. That's for sure. Don't feel shocked. Some of the cancers are very easy to treat, some are not. We know that. But it is a reality of our own existence. Like I said, because cancer is just like part of us. If one of our little cells go wrong, well, yeah, if the mechanism regulating that fail, then we have cancer. It's just a cell that is just part of our own existence. It's not a bug. It's not something that someone did for us. It's not God punishing us. It's a consequences of who we are. This is what it is. And is there something that I can tell that's going to make us feel a little bit more happy now, is that, look at what Paul said. In everything I did, I showed to you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering that the words of the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. If we live by this, and no matter what cancer you have, no matter what you go through, you're always going to cure yourself. Because it's amazing, but if you look at this study, Mac Leland et al. In 2 different papers in 86 and 88 showed that it's a very simple setup. They had students watching a movie, and the movie was about Mother Teresa work in Calcutta. So they were sitting down like we are now, and they were watching the movie. And right after the movie, they checked on some specific signs on their body. One of the one they checked is the IgA, which is the immunoglobulin in the saliva that helps protect your body. What they realized is that those who were watching Mother Teresa do her work, they were actually with more protective antibodies, which means that their body was responding to the thoughts they were generating of love and charity at that time. So they were protecting themselves. What's most amazing about this is that when they were asked to dwell on that movie or that specific idea, again, their IgA levels were up, which means that if we live by the ideas of helping others, we automatically put ourselves in a position of cure, because that's what we have to do. And that's tested in mainstream science, right? So why not help others? That's a very good way to start. And I don't know how I'm doing with the time. I have 5 minutes. Okay, good. So I'm going to finish with the, so just before I finish now, I just want to mention this. So our little friend Carcinos, which again has been in history over and over time, and we call him a disease, we call him a constellation, a nebula, an animal, and you know, if you go in history, you'll see how many times history called up on crabs. But the message behind this is that, you know, sometimes we have to look at things with different eyes. Sometimes when we're living on a situation, we can only see as far as our little narrow sight can see. So we're surrounded by darkness all the time, right? So sometimes we have to see beyond that. Sometimes we see like a little Carcinos guy that's very happily living with his family and, you know, with 850 different species and all that. And not as a lethal disease we've ever encountered. But remember this little passage, that faith in God does not keep you away from the inevitable trials, but gives you the strength to support them. Faith does not move obstacles on the way. You have to go through them. However, it will help you understand each one of them, and you may receive in silence the message they convey. Faith does not keep you from the disillusion and disappointment that the world will trigger, but will help you learn the lessons they convey. Faith will not prevent your most fond companions from moving away from you during your journey. However, it will give you energy and resources to replace them until other fellows show up, decided to support you. Faith will not prevent you from falling ill, as you may still need to go through this. However, it will enlighten you to understand and assimilate the message behind all that. Faith will not move your problematic relative away from you. However, it will help you accept and understand it in your own benefit. Faith will not save you from falls and difficulties. Remember the magic pill that we are all seeking for during the way. However, will teach you through your own pain which situations should be avoided for your own progress. It will not dismiss the problems that perhaps threaten your peace. However, will give you the serenity to resolve them safely. Will not rescue from the maze of illusion in which you might have thoughtlessly penetrated. However, will clarify your ideas so you can free yourself. Finally, faith in God will not change the overall challenging scenario of evolution, but will instill patience in order for you to understand all the steps of elevation. Steps you need to climb to reach the highest levels of imperishable life. That's by Emmanuel, psychographed by Chico Xavier. And thank you very much.
Child of God, I am a child of God, I am a spirit living on